the show, we have Tom DeFalco, former editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics with over 50 books currently in print. Tom DeFalco joined the comic book industry in 1972 and has written comics from Spider-Man, Spider-Girl, the Fantastic Four, Thor, Superman, Superboy, the Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, and even Archie's. He's produced books such as Spider-Man, The Ultimate Guide, and Comic Creators on Spider-Man. His current claim to fame is that he's the co-creator of Peter Porker, the Spectacular Spider-Ham.
Thank you so much for being on the show, Tom. This is another episode of Origins, A Creative Journey, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Could you share with us your origin story? How did your creative journey begin?
I think it had to do with me, finding comic strips in my father's newspaper and being fascinated by the daily comics, the Sunday comics. I used to cut the comic strips out of the paper, hopefully after my father had already read it. If he hadn't read it, things did not go well at home. I was always trying to get him to buy all of the Sunday papers so I could get all of the Sunday comics. But he only liked certain papers, so I rarely got to see Prince Valiant because that was in a different newspaper. And somewhere along the line, one of my cousins, my cousin John, we were at some family gathering and he handed me a Batman comic. And I don't remember what Batman comic it was or anything, but I just remember Batman scared the heck out of me. And I was fascinated by this idea that, hey, there's a complete story here in one of these comic books. And then I found out you could buy comic books everywhere. Well, not everywhere, but almost everywhere. And from then on, I was hooked. I think it was in second grade, they asked us to draw something. And I remember I drew this rock and a tentacle behind the rock. And my teacher said to me, "What is this?" And I said, "Oh, this is an alien planet. And there's a creature behind there." And I made up this whole story about this exploring space and that sort of thing. And I realized by then I was already coming up with stories and, illustrated stories. And after that, whenever they had art class, they would send me on errands. But, from that point on, I was always just coming up with stories. And I don't know at what point I realized that my destiny was to be a writer. When I was in high school, I joined the school newspaper and the school literary magazine and all of that sort of stuff. When the time came to go to college, my plan was to take an education course, be a teacher and a weekend writer. Due to some strange situations, I got an elective in my freshman year in college. So I thought, I'm going to take an education course right away. And the only one that was available was called Philosophy of Education. I signed up for that. I was a freshman. Everybody else in the class was seniors. They had gone for 4 years through my college on education. And then talking about the philosophy of education, the first question they asked is, what is education? And nobody in the classroom knew. They had all these theories. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. You went to this college for 4 years and you don't know what education is. And I thought, man, this must be the worst school for education majors. What I didn't know, because it was my first philosophy courses, there are no answers in philosophy. They're just questions. But it was my first philosophy course. So what I thought was, man, I got to get out of this education program because this education program here sucks. So I thought, this idea of becoming a teacher isn't going to work. So I better start trying to be a writer. So I sat down and started working on short stories. And in those days, there were hundreds of markets where you could sell short stories, genre short stories, fantasy stories, mystery stories, that sort of stuff. So I worked on a story, sent it out, and a couple of months later, got this check in the mail. They bought it. Yay! It was for a fabulous sum. I don't remember what that fabulous sum was. It was probably about 10, 15 bucks. But hey, I was rich. And from there, I started working there was this free newspaper. And I started working for this newspaper, writing articles, writing reviews of comic books and, restaurant reviews and whatever assignment they would give me, and they were paying me to do these articles. And then eventually I went to the school's PR department and started working for them and started writing press releases, junk like that. And then there was the actual newspaper that they charged people for. Went to them and started working for them. And, they were paying me to do this writing. So I thought, hey, this writing gig, not bad. And then when I finally graduated college, while I was in college, I started doing a weekly comic strip. And when I graduated college, I went to a couple of the magazines, short stories, to look for a job because I thought, you got to have a job. I was raised with the concept of a job. The magazine guys basically said, hey, you're a writer, go home and write. And I thought, that's no job. I got to find the job. And eventually I sent a resume to Archie Comics, and they invited me to come in for an interview, and they gave me an actual job. And then right away I started trying to figure out how I could write for Archie Comics. And then from there, at a certain point, I started writing for Charlton Comics while working for Archie, and started working part-time for Archie. I think towards the end there, I was coming in 2 days a week because I needed to have a job. And I was freelancing for Archie and Charlton, and then DC, and then eventually Marvel. And that's my origin story. I'd like to say there was a master plan behind it, but, a lot of my origin story is I just happened to be, walking in the door when they needed somebody.
That is so fascinating. And thank you for sharing. I think what I'm hearing too, though, is you mentioned it was sort of the luck of you walking in the door when they needed someone, but it also sounded to me that like your love of writing sort of transcended even I think a lot of people who are writing come in and they're like, I want to write comics, or I want to write novels, or I like, there's this creativity world building that a lot of creative writers come into. But it sounds to me that you were willing just to write. I mean, you were doing newspapers, you were doing PR, you were just constantly honing your skills in any sort of written manner. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes. And one of the things I tell young writers today, if you want to be a writer first, because editors are a cowardly and superstitious lot. You like that line?
Yes.
I ripped it off. Anyway, and they only want to publish someone who's already been published. So it's important to hone your craft and learn how to write. All writing comes down to structure and knowing the structure of the medium that you're dealing with. So I think it's very important to always be a writer first, and a guy who does comics second, or a guy who does short stories second, or a guy who writes newspaper artists second. But you're a writer first. And all these other types of media that you deal with, these are just extra arrows in your quiver. Right. Tell your stories, whether it's a fictional story or a non-fictional story. Structure, structure, structure.
I actually love that you hit on it too. These creative industries, editors, they're not willing to take a risk. A lot of them. No.
They can depend on you to actually do the job.
Yeah.
Time and again, I've gone to comic book conventions where people come up to me and say, I want to be a writer. I want to be a writer. I want to be just like you. And I'm thinking, do you realize that to be a writer, you have to lock yourself in a room for 8 to 12 hours a day, every day of the week. And you've got to just sit there with just your stupid imagination. And you've got to face that blank page and cut yourself off from everybody. I think too many guys, they see writers sitting at a comic convention or at a signing, and we're sitting there, we're cracking jokes and we're signing comic books, and they think that's what we do. That's what I do maybe 10 days out of 365. Part of that is therapy, just to get out of that room. I'm a newlywed. I've been married about 7.5 years. When my wife first came in, she looked at my office and she said, "What is this cave?" And I said, "Well, this is where I work. And I have a blackout curtains and everything." She said, "Nobody can work in here. This is a cave." And I said, "Well, when I come in here, all I need to do is focus on the computer. I don't lift up my curtain because I'm a lucky guy. I live on the water. And she said, you have a beautiful view out there. Yeah, that's why I keep the curtain down so I don't look at the view. Yeah. All I do is look at the computer. Nothing else matters. If it works for you, that's fine. I mean, so you got to be able to lock yourself in a room for 8 to 10 hours. I remember one time I was asked to do a prose short story for an anthology. And I'm talking to an editor friend of mine. I'm saying, this story is just kicking my butt. I'm having, every time I work on this thing, I'm just getting nowhere. And he said to me, well, you know what you have to do. And I said, yeah, I know what I have to do. I have to plant my butt in my chair and just sit there until I finish the damn story. He goes, that's exactly what you have to do. That's what we do. One of the differences between a professional writer and an amateur writer is amateurs love everything they do. Professionals keep looking at things thinking, oh, I love that scene, except it doesn't fit in this story, so I have to throw it out. Oh, I love this bit, except it doesn't fit the theme of the story. It just meanders. I have to throw it out. I lie to people and say, oh, yeah, when you do novels, just go off on tangents. Yeah, only if the tangent actually supports your theme and your story, because otherwise you have to throw it out. It's always frustrating to me when you come to a point and you look back and go, oh, no, I made a wrong turn. I have to throw out 50 pages of material here because it doesn't fit. I made life too easy for me. That is the joy of being a writer.
I love that differentiation between the amateur and the professional and the level of commitment both to the craft and to yourself in order to make it kind of over that hump into the professional sphere. And this is just kind of a personal question as another writer. Tom, when you find that piece that doesn't fit in that story, or like you're like, oh, I have these 50 pages and this just doesn't work because it's not working with the themes or the overarching story arc, do you just delete it, or do you save that kind of in a file someplace in case it works for a different story, or it might be the genesis of something else? Or do you literally just like select all, hit delete button and keep going?
It depends on how much blood, sweat, and tears I put into it. Because a lot of times I lie to myself. I take it and I put it into a separate file saying, oh, I'll be able to use this sometime in the future. Not a chance in hell. And part of me knows that. But since I'm great with fiction and I'm paid to tell lies on paper, so I can lie to myself and say, oh, yeah, I'll save this because maybe someday it'll fit into some other thing. But if I'm doing it right, it's never going to fit into anything else. Most of the time I know that, but sometimes it's really hard to delete 50 pages. Though I've done it.
I want to pull on your writing stuff little more. And everyone who listens to the podcast is used to this. Chris has to tell a story when he asks a question. It's just my brain. But first, I had the privilege of working with you. I started as one of Mary's boys working for Ralph Macchio. And Ralph let me go to Grunwald's class okay? And it was great.
Was I still part of those?
Yeah. Okay, I'll do the quick history because you won't remember me. I'm not offended in any way. So I worked for Ralph. You were writing Fantastic Four. I started as a college intern. I came back. You were still there. Then Mary got me to move to California to work for Stan. So, and then when everyone gone, when you left, and then soon afterwards, they got rid of all of us. So just for time frame, so you when it was. Okay. Because I was coloring Thunderstruck. Anyways, Grunwald used to teach you how the Marvel way and how to write stories. And so came back and Ralph got in at 1. You remember those days?
Right.
And he was like, what did you learn today? Because you guys were just the best. I had Ramita on one side of Ralph's office, and Ralph would just ask me questions, and it was like a sponge. I was like a kid, 20 years old, learning all this stuff. You guys were fabulous. And I said, well, Grunwald said the secret to writing good characters is you have to become that character. And he said, Quasar is easy for me to write because I'm Quasar. Captain America is hard for me to write because he's Captain America, blah, blah, blah. I was like, it was fascinating. Ralph goes, go get Tom. So he sent me down to your office, made you come back and tell the story again.
And Ralph goes, tell him what it's like to write Spider-Man, what it's like to write Fantastic Four. So I'm going to do the same question to you that we did all those years ago. How do you approach a character and become that character and write as that character and think of that character?
You have to crawl into the character's brain, and you got to try to figure out, what does this character want? What is all about this guy? What can you identify with this character? Now, let's use the Fantastic Four as an example. Ben Grimm, the Thing. I can identify with Ben because I'm kind of a big, clunky guy walking around, smashing into things, clumsy. Somebody who is not the most socially adept person in the world. And I pay attention to what I'm paying attention to. And hey, if you don't like it, screw you. Ben, and there was a time when I was working on this book called Marvel 2-in-1, which featured Ben. It was one of my early assignments for it. And I remember that Jim Shooter, who was the editor-in-chief who preceded me, said, every time I read 2-in-1, I'm wondering whether or not this is an autobiography or if you're actually dealing with the characters here. So Ben and I, we were in 2. Johnny Storm, I'm not the good-looking guy all the ladies love, all right? And I'm not that guy who's looking for the publicity. But I know that guy. He was a friend of mine. I don't want to mention his name, but every time he walked into a room, he had this smug, smiling face because he knew that every woman in that room was looking at him and wanted him to talk to them and that sort of thing. So I understood him because, like I said, he was one of my good buddies. And Reed Richards, I looked at Reed and thought, man, this guy, he's very smart. He knows everything, but he's haunted by a mistake he made. He didn't account for the cosmic rays, which ruined his best friend's life, screwed up his relationship with his girlfriend, put them in a strange predicament where they have to save the world at least every 30 days. And he's kind of haunted by that. And as a result, prepares for every conceivable problem. He sits around trying to imagine problems and trying to figure out how to save them, how to solve that problem in case he ever comes up with it. Which is why a lot of times when Reed Richards was in a situation, he knew that he had a weapon that could deal with this, hidden in this laboratory on this floor, because he anticipated a problem like this at one time. How do you write somebody who's so much more intelligent than you are? You write backwards. You figure out the solution to the problem, and then you go backwards. So that first you know the solution, and then you go backwards. So that Reed is presented with a problem, which he's now going to solve because you already know the solution because that's where you started. A lot of times it's like with mystery novels. You have to know who the guilty guy is before you start. And you have to know how he got there. And you have to know all the answers so that as you write the novel, you can plant all the appropriate clues. Structure, structure, structure. Stu Richards, she was harder. But then I realized she's like any wife, mother, she's just trying to protect her family. And her focus is on the family and keeping the family together. And in many ways, she was the most powerful of the 4 of them. She didn't exploit her power enough because her focus was to be on the defense, to protect her family. And that's why when I was writing Fantastic Four, I made her much more aggressive, where she had to, that the only way to protect her family was to go on a good offense all the time. And at one point, it looked like Reed was dead, even though she never accepted it. And she had to go on the offense, and she had to take control and had to make all the hard decisions for her family because the rest of the family, Ben was just kind of lost. And Johnny's powerful, but he's kind of useless. He's not the big thinker. Peter Parker is an easy character to crawl into his head because he's a guy, his parents are about to go on a trip, and they take him and they give him to his uncle and his aunt. And the parents say to this kid what we say to every kid when we're dropping them off someplace: be good for your aunt and uncle. Don't give them problems. Just be a good boy for your aunt and uncle. And then his parents go away and they never come back. So Peter is under the instructions. He's got to be the good boy for his aunt and uncle. And he spends his time living his life responsibly because he was told to by his parents who went off and died. And then later on, he gets a chance. He gets this power, gets this amazing thing. He can, climb up walls. He's got super strength. He's got incredible agility. He's got a chance to make a lot of money by getting into show business. And then it all goes to shit on him because he forgot to be responsible. And that is why with great power, there should come great responsibility. It doesn't come great responsibility, but there should come great responsibility. And that's the message of Spider-Man. I've had this discussion with a number of people who often tell me, oh, you have to understand Spider-Man. I have to understand that he's going out taking pictures. He uses the spider thing as a way of making money. And I go, no. That was something he stumbled onto, but it's all about responsibility. And 9 times out of 10, whenever I do a Spider-Man story, I'd say, okay, how are we going to write about responsibility this month? And it was, like I said, all about responsibility. Fantastic Four is all about family. A lot of Thor stuff. How do you deal with a thunder god of all places? Well, it's easy. I thought about what is the essence of Thor. His father has a nice family business, like a corner deli. Here's the family business. We take care of Asgard. And the son goes, wait a minute. We don't have to just take care of Asgard. We can take care of Earth, too. We can take care of the universe. We can expand. We can franchise. We can take care of a bunch of people. No. You got to stay here, take care of Asgard. And Dad had this nice girl. I'm dating on her. No, you got to marry a nice Asgardian girl. What are you talking about? You come here, you work in the deli, you'll marry a nice Asgardian girl. It's the conversations we've all had with our parents. Oh, no, that girl's not good enough for you. Can't you find a nice girl from the neighborhood? This is how I call it to characters' minds.
I love this. And this is the same conversation we had all these years ago. And I will tell you, it is honestly the best lesson I learned at Marvel Comics. I'm chief storyteller at Microsoft, and I call it empathy. You guys taught me how to create characters and use empathy. And I'm repeating it because I want everyone who listens to understand this. This is, in my opinion, one of the great things you ever taught me. I want the world to comprehend it. So thank you again.
And you need that empathy. For the good guys and the bad guys. We have to feel bad for the bad guys. I look at Dr. Doom. And again, I know Dr. Doom. I've met him. I've worked with him. I know Dr. Doom. All right. And he never thought of himself as the bad guy. And our Dr. Doom, what does he want to do? He wants to bring in world peace. He wants to end hunger. He wants to end crime. And he's going to make the earth a paradise. And all he asks is one simple little thing in return. Total blind obedience. Hey, that's a small thing to ask. He's going to make the world a paradise. But God forbid you step out of line one day and you'll be obliterated. Boom. A lot of times when I worked on Dr. Doom, knew the guy I had in mind. Because I knew him, I had conversations with him. And I felt for Dr. Doom because he really wanted his goals were good goals. And so many times your villains have to have good, lofty goals. It's just the ends do not justify the means, as far as we're concerned. And a lot of times when you can put your reader in a position going, I don't know who to root for in this particular instance, then you got the makings of a good story.
100% agree. Thank you so much for all of that, because I think most of the stories that have stuck with me are the ones where you're kind of like, I don't know, maybe the bad guy wasn't so wrong. It was just he was going about it the wrong way, and I think to your point, that's what makes the challenge so compelling, right? Because if we can't see it from the villain's perspective, it's just like a stock monster or something. But if we can empathize with them and we were like, oh yeah, like maybe Thanos has got something going on there with like wanting to snap everybody, we can actually really see that conflict come to light. I just want to keep going on with the craft because you're such a wealth of knowledge. But I want to hear more about your story too. And going from journalism and just writing in general in the newspapers all the way to comics to writing full on stories and becoming an editor-in-chief at Marvel and then continuing to write comics all these years. What do you think the most difficult part about that journey has been for you?
Keeping on, just facing that blank page on a daily basis. When I was starting out, my goal when I got out of college was to write prose material and also to maybe do a comic strip. I enjoyed doing comic strips, and I thought, I got to do comic strips. And I did a bunch of cartoons at one point or another. I think I sent Playboy magazine close to 100 cartoons. They didn't buy a single one of them. But the editor started writing me notes about my cartoons. She liked them enough that write me a note about it, but she didn't like them enough to buy them. I wanted her to buy them, of course. And the first couple of short stories I did, they sold. Wow, that's great. And then a couple came out and didn't sell. You're always out there. You're always hustling, trying to see if you can make that next sale. Like I said, a million years ago when I started, there were all these magazines. Recently, I was at a college talking about creativity, and somebody said to me, where do you get your ideas from? I said, you get your ideas from everywhere. And I looked out the window and I said, look, there's a leaf falling from a tree. You look at that leaf and you say, what if that was a body? Where did it come from? And you go from there. And, we finished up that discussion. And that night I go back to my hotel room and said, where did that body come from? And then spent a week or two working on that short story. All right. Hey, I got another short story. I haven't done a short story in years. And then look around and think, wait a minute, what happened to all the magazines that used to buy these kind of short stories? So I'm still trying to find a home for that short story. And it frustrates me because people say to me, well, how do you break in these days? How did you break in? Well, the way I broke in, you can't break in anymore. You can't break in exactly that way, but you can still break in. And you break in by following the same kind of path, which is start getting published. Every town has a small newspaper. Sometimes they're giveaway newspapers. Sometimes they're these little things that just sit there. Get them, volunteer, write some reviews, write things that you care about. A former comic book editor that I know, he said he wants to do more writing, but there aren't that many openings in the comic book field. And I said, well, you're a skier. Every year, you can't wait for the snow to come down. Write articles for ski magazines because you care about that. And that always brings me up to what I always say is the secret of writing. I have this little prepared thing that I do at comic book conventions, telling people the 7 C's of comics, which are things to keep in mind if you're writing comics. Then I say, then there's the 8th thing, which is the secret of all writing. It's the secret of writing comics, the secret of writing novels, the secret of writing articles. It's the big secret. And I'm going to share with you that secret. You have to care about what you're writing. You have to care. And that's the most important thing. If you're writing a 1-page joke, Reggie's Wise Guy jokes, you have to care about that joke and think that this is a funny joke. If you're going to write, a Spider-Man story, you have to care about that story and think this is an important story. Caring is the most important thing. I'm a lucky guy. I've been put on certain titles that I've been on for years. And I think the secret is I grow to care about my characters and what's happening in their lives. And as a result, I make my readers care about it. Spider-Girl had a whole cast of characters, and I cared about every one of them, which is why a lot of times the people who you would think would be a bad guy eventually becomes a good guy because I cared about them. I got to know them. I learned all sorts of things about them. And I thought, maybe he's not such a bad guy after all. I think that's an important thing. And even if you're writing an article about skiing or about story structure, you have to care about it. Christopher mentioned the assistant editor classes that we used to run at Marvel. When I became editor-in-chief, I thought, we have to preserve the craft because it's important that every craft be preserved. People learn the basics of a craft because these are crafts. Certain people think, I'm a creative writer. All I do is sit down and whatever flows out. And if you think that's what writing is, good luck to you. I only know 2 guys who can sit down and let it all flow out. One was Stan Lee, and the other guy is Jerry Conway, the most amazing freaking writer I've ever seen, could just sit down and it just flows from him. Such a natural writer. The rest of us have to work at it. We had those assistant editor classes. I was there, I think, for the first or second year. And those classes were actual classes. Before we started, Grooney and I set up a whole syllabus. We set it up just the way teachers set up syllabuses because, hey, I knew about those things. So we set up a syllabus. Class number 1, we're going to discuss this. This is the point. These are the examples, blah, blah, blah. And Grooney and I rehearsed the first bunch. And I asked if I was at the ones that you attended, Chris, because routinely in the class would bring up a point and Groom would give an example. Any character that you have should be every character in the supporting cast, some sort of a reflection of the main character. And then I would look at Grooney and go, what do you mean? And he would give me 1 or 2 examples. And then he'd turn to the class and expect them to come up with examples. And I was always very dumb. And I go, what? Huh? Well, how about with so-and-so? How does his supporting cast work? It goes, well, so-and-so is, and then he turned to the class and they come up with examples. And we used to pull this routine week after week. And Gordy said, at some point they're going to realize that you're not as stupid as you're pretending to be. And I said, nah. As far as they're concerned, I'm an idiot. Because the young guys always think the older guys are idiots. We'll keep on doing it until somebody points it out that, hey, you keep doing the same routine. No one ever caught us on that. But I thought that was an important part of being an editor, which was helping train the next generation. I kind of wish they were still doing that today. I also kind of wish I kept a copy of the syllabus.
So, little trick. I wasn't actually an assistant editor. We won't mention who was Ralph's assistant editor because I don't want to get anybody in trouble. And he didn't last long. And I was the intern. So, Ralph, that's how I got to go. Like,
well, the interns all wanted to sneak into those.
Everyone was mad because I was the only one who got to go.
Well, I used to say, listen, if they don't have work to do, let them go. I said, this is education. It's not like we're charging for this. Maybe I should have.
You should have, because it was the best education.
Part of me was just like, Tom, is this like a side business that you're now creating? Is this like a recap of all of those classes? Because I would sign up for that in a heartbeat if I knew that was happening. So
I had people ask me, hey, how would you like to teach a course? How would you like to do that? I had always thought that at a certain point you run out of stories. When I run out of stories, I'll become a teacher. I'll finally become that teacher who works on the weekend instead of being the writer who has to work on the weekend because he's got a deadline on Monday. And that dream of being a teacher died one night. I was out to dinner with a friend of mine, Danny Fingeroth, who is an editor who has conned me again and again into taking assignments that I didn't think I should have taken. And Danny often teaches and said to me, I cut this short tonight. I have to go home and I have to grade papers. And I thought, grade papers? Yeah, that teaching thing isn't going to work out for me. Like I say, sometimes when I go to conventions, I give little speeches on the craft because I want people to know what the craft is.
I can 100% relate because that's why I used to teach at an art university up in San Francisco. And the reason I eventually left was because of the paper grading. I was like, I just want to give you the knowledge. The paper grading's the worst part.
Yeah,
so
who wants
I feel
to do
you.
That sort of thing. Well, I'm lucky because I've been invited to the basics of storytelling to a lot of different places. Lucasfilm invited me up a couple of times to give little speeches and that sort of stuff, which is a nice thing for the ego because, hey, there's George Lucas. I get to see George Lucas. Hey. I look at guys and I'm thinking, what do you have to listen to me for? You guys are creating great movies. Forget about me. But yeah, grading papers, not for me.
This leads me to ask a question. You were very good at juggling. Like you were editor in chief. I still remember these days. You're editor in chief and you're writing books, and editor in chief's not an easy job. You were the face of the office. You were the face of the people, right? And you were very approachable. Anyone could go see Tom and talk to Tom. And at the same time, you're writing books, and there's a whole other side to it, working with Ron on a book, and you got to have to talk to the artist, and there's this whole communication and working with the editors. And like with Ralph, you're his boss, and then he's your boss. Like, how do you juggle this? Because your career is a lot of that. So I'm just curious to get into that.
Well, when I was editor in chief, yes, I did writing for the company, but I tended to work with guys that I had worked with long before I became editor in chief. Ralph had assigned me to write Thor, a couple of years before I became editor in chief. And we established the working pattern. I'd present ideas to him. The ones he liked, he would say, "Oh, this is terrific." The ones he didn't like, he'd go, that's an interesting idea. You got anything else? And the other guy who kept conning me into doing additional work was Danny Fingeroth. Danny and I had worked together even before I joined staff at Marvel. So Danny was always trying to con me into doing extra Spider-Man stuff. And he was a great con artist, because I always remember said, "Hey, we're going to do a new Spider-Man title called Spider-Man Unlimited." I said, "Yeah, I know. They approved that title." And he goes, "Yeah, well, we figure just need a writer to write the lead story." He says, "You love Spider-Man." I said, "Yeah, I love Spider-Man, but I don't have time to write a story." Said, Come on. This is one Spider-Man story every 3 or 4 months. Come on. I forget I think one Spider-Man story every 3 months. Come on. You got plenty of time and that sort of thing. I'm thinking, what extra time do I have? And he said, "Come on, it'll be easy. You get to work on Spider-Man. Maybe you can do some things with Ron. You can have a good time." And I thought, all right, Dan, I'll try the first story. And then, of course, the first story is Maximum Carnage, which we had to completely plot out a 12-part epic and stuff like that. All those parts, I was ready to kill them. So many of those assignments, when I go to conventions, and there were people who didn't like my work, and hey, that's okay. Some people like, some people don't like. And the people who didn't like my work said, "Well, the only reason you get assignments is because you're on staff at Marvel." And I'm thinking, I don't know. But they're asking me to do more stuff than I have time for. So maybe yes, maybe no. And being editor in chief, I used to get to the office every morning about 8 o'clock. And if I was lucky, I would leave at 7 o'clock. And I'd go home, get home about 8 o'clock, 8:30, have dinner, and take out my frustrations on my computer for the next couple of hours. Anytime Spider-Man was punching somebody, I knew exactly who he was punching. and then I'd sleep and get up about 6 o'clock, work for an hour, sometimes an hour and a half, 2 hours, catch the train, go in, and proofread my work from the previous day and then drop it off. And then Saturday and Sunday, 2 15-hour days, catching up on my work. And, I look back on that and I'm thinking, was I out of my freaking mind? And a couple of years ago, I said, a friend said, "You're slowing down." I said, "Yeah, I now consider myself semi-retired." He says, "What does that mean?" I said, "That means I take the weekends off most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time I try to take the weekends off." And a lot of times I work around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And sometimes I still pull the all-nighters just because sometimes when you're working on something, there are times I say, I just want to go up and I got to fix a paragraph. It's just going to take me 10, 15 minutes. I just have to fix this paragraph. And then you turn around and go, wait a minute, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. What the heck happened here? And it's part disease, but this is the life we've chosen.
That is a beautiful line, because it's the life we chosen. And if we go back to what we're talking about, like, it's the hustle and the passion and learning to take rejections and working to 4 in the morning. And I don't think people realize, oh, I'm going to be a comic book writer or an artist, the amount of dedication the craft actually takes. They just think, oh, I'm going to write.
Well, I don't know if it's dedication. We're just stuck doing this stuff. I mean,
We're just crazy.
yeah. And sometimes when the stuff is really flowing, it's hard to get up and walk away from it. And when the stuff isn't flowing, you can't get up. You have to keep smashing your head against that wall. Every creative job that you deal with, at some point you face what I refer to as either the hump of the wall. All right. And you slam against that. If it's a novel, you're hoping it comes around chapter 22 and not chapter 2. You just got to keep smashing your head against that wall until you break through, because you have to eventually break through. And you have to finish the job. And that's another thing that marks the professionals from the amateurs. We finish. A lot of times when you're working on something, you think, oh, man, this is going to be it. This is going to show that I'm not the bum that everybody thinks I am. I'm gonna really do a story that means something. And then you're getting there, and then you look at it and go, oh man, no, this is a piece of shit. But it's due tomorrow. Got to finish it anyway. We are always the worst judges of our material. Sometimes we've done something really great, and people look at it and go, oh, yeah, that's not bad. And sometimes we think we've done something really terrible, and they look and go, wow, this is the best thing you've ever done. When I look back on stories, what I remember is more of where my life was at the time. Some stories, people say, oh, I love this story because there's such pathos and empathy. And I'm thinking, yeah, that was a really shitty time of my life. That was just, man, that was just a horrible, horrible experience that I had to get through. And some stories, I remember certain stories that, because of the circumstances around there, when I finished the story, I wasn't even sure it all fit together and made sense. And then later on, the editor said, boy, that was some powerful story you did. And I said, did it all? Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I scratched my head thinking, I'm not sure. I don't know. Part of that was I was just typing through the pain. And certain scenes still haunt me years later. Ron Friends and I, had a discussion recently. There's a scene that we did at the end of Thunderstrike that neither one of us can get through that scene anymore, can get through that without bursting into tears, because we drew upon our own lives where we had to say goodbye to people we loved. And we had a character say his last goodbye to somebody he loved. Certain things, they haunt you years later.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Tom. I hear that there is so much, just I think any creative, whether they are an amateur or an amateur seeking to become a professional, can gain from everything you just shared. But you have such a healthy outlook on writing the story and understanding that maybe something you think is going to be great doesn't resonate with other people, and then something that you feel isn't great becomes this powerful thing that touches so many people. What might you tell other creatives in terms of how to think about managing the expectations around whether or not something takes off or finds legs or gets published, or, to your point, whether or not it gets even bought or well received? How might they better navigate the ups and downs of the creative professional journey?
I think they have to divorce themselves from it. You become a writer because you have to write. You have to tell the story. And Denny O'Neil used to have a sign in his office saying, the story is boss, which means, we live and die in the service of that story. And you just work on that story and do the best story you can. And then once you're done, you go on to the next one. And once I turn in a story, I try not to look at it again. So many guys, when their work comes out, they can't wait to reread it. Yeah, I already know how it ends. I'm not interested. I'm more interested in the next story I'm doing. And I think that certain things are going to sell and make you a lot of money, and certain things are not going to sell. And you can't guess what's going to touch the public. But if you care and you put your heart and soul into it, then you'll be touching your readers. And that's what you want to do. You want your readers You care about your story. You want your readers to care about the stories. And as long as you're getting paid, you can continue doing more stories. I've always been told that I'm a very crash commercialist kind of guy because I'm always looking to get paid. And the reason for that is if I don't get paid, then I'm going to have to go out and get a real job. And I'm afraid of that because I'm not really that skilled. I don't know what I could do. And I'm running out of time, too, because I think manual labor is gone for me at this stage of the game. So you need to keep getting paid so that you can keep on doing stories. And even if it's only paid a little bit of money, because that's how somebody cared enough about it to lay out a couple of bucks. And one thing you should always remember, as a writer, you are a great imposition on your reader because you are demanding two things from your readers. You're demanding time and money. You're asking them to buy your material. And even more important, you're taking up their time. And maybe it's because of my advanced years. I can tell you that the most valuable thing any of us have is time. It's the one thing we can never get back. We can always figure out a way to earn more money, but we can never get more time. And when the clock runs out on us, we're going to say, I always regret reading that crummy story by Tom DeFalco. I don't want anybody to feel like that when their time comes. I doubt anybody's thinking about that when their time comes, but I don't want anybody to ever think that. So just worry about putting in your best efforts and how people are going to react to it. Most of the time, you're never going to know because you're never going to know whether or not anybody likes anything that you've done. Most of the time, especially in this world of the internet, only people who dislike you or looking to say, make a name for themselves by being catty, they're the only people that are going to write about your stuff. All of that is just going to be very depressing and distressing. I happen to be a very lucky guy again. When I became editor-in-chief, naturally everything I wrote was terrible. And the critics would rip my stuff apart. And I had a secret weapon called Larry Hama. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Larry Hama. He's the guy who did
Sweet Man.
Sweet Man. Probably the most underrated writer and artist this industry has ever seen. He's been writing G.I. Joe for 30, 40 years now. Incredibly creative guy who had the most infectious laugh in creation. Every time I got a bad review, Larry would bring in the fanzine and he'd read it out loud and laugh hysterically. Boy, they really ripped you into one ear. Look at they call you the biggest hack in Korea. Ha, ha, ha. And Larry would laugh and I would have to laugh. And the two of us would be reading these terrible reviews, laughing like lunatics. I remember one time Broomwald walks in and goes, "What are you guys laughing about?" "Oh, look at it. They called Tom the biggest idiot." And, he's a hack. And the two of us would laugh. And Bruno looked at us and said, "You guys are crazy." But thanks to Larry, anytime I bad review, all I do is hear Larry's laughter in the background. And it just makes me laugh. So I don't care. You can't take anything anybody writes personally. When I was working on Fantastic Four, the critics all hated that title. They hated the run. And everybody claimed to hate it. Yet every month the sales went up, which was befuddling to us. And I spoke to a critic one time and I said, "Listen, every month you write a review about how bad this book is. Why are you wasting your time on a book that you obviously hate?" He says, "Well, because I have to find out what happens next." I said, "Well, what exactly do you hate so much about the book?" He says, "You're just so mean to all the characters. Can't you do a month where nothing bad happens to them?" And I said, "Listen, every month there are 30 days in which nothing bad happens to them. But no, I'm not going to do an issue where nothing happens in the book." I said, and he said, "Well, it's a roller coaster ride, and I just get upset for the characters." "Well, okay, well, that means you actually like the book." And he goes, "Absolutely not." I said, "Well, then stop reading it." "No, I can't." And now, years later, every time I go to a convention, people come to me with Fantastic Four saying, "Oh, this was always my favorite run." I'm thinking, where were you when I needed you?
You're making me go down memory lane so much, making me so happy. Because I remember you run on Fantastic Four and you had Johnny Storm wear a leather jacket. You and Ron. Yes. Yeah, see?
It was Paul Ryan.
Paul Ryan, yeah.
I said to Paul, "Hey, listen, Paul," because everybody was wearing leather jackets. Remember I said, hey, Johnny should be wearing one of those member-only jackets. What do you think? And he says, are you serious? I said, yeah. Why not? When we see him, when we see Johnny, you should do it. Next time, Paul sends in a cover, and the Human Torch is wearing this leather jacket. I said, what the hell is the Human Torch wearing a jacket? He says, you told me to put Johnny in the jacket. I said, Johnny, when he's walking around in a civilian thing. And I said, Paul, how are we going to explain this? He says, I don't know. You're the writer. Come up with it. So I came up with some bullshit thing on why the Human Torch is wearing a jacket. And I'm thinking, oh, God. And then I realized when Ron and I were working on Spider-Man, we always referred to him as Pete. Whether he's in the costume, he's not in the costume. What's Pete doing? What's going on with Pete? Blah, blah, blah. Thor, when he was Thor, and, when he started dealing, getting connected with Eric, we just referred to him as Eric, and we just, and I thought, oh, yeah, I got to remember when I'm thinking about Johnny Storm, I should say Johnny Storm, and the Torch is separate. But yeah, we had the Torch in a jacket, and what a mess that was. But we tried to
remember you laughing and laughing and laughing when that cover came in and the bullpen put up the picture of it. You just laughed and laughed and laughed.
Hey, come on. Hey, this is comics. Even when we screw up, it's not brain surgery. Nobody died. The wonderful thing about comics is we're just telling stories. We're having fun. And we're making it up as we go along. Certain people think that there's a timeline that we all have. I remember when I became editor-in-chief, about a week or two after I became editor-in-chief, I was going to a convention and Stan was going to be there. So we arranged to have dinner. And Stan and I knew each other. We worked together a lot. And it was just going to be him and me. I just became editor-in-chief. He wanted to congratulate me. And I said, Stan, how do you do this? And he looked at me and he laughed. He says, I don't know. I was just making it up as I went along. He said, the fact that you're editor-in-chief, whatever you say, people are going to think that you know what you're talking about. So just say it with authority and people will buy that bullshit. When you guys are managers and stuff, I'm going to tell you the greatest secret I stumbled upon. Many times editors would come in and they would have a problem with their creative team and they wouldn't know what to do. And I'd say to them, well, imagine you had total control over this title. Is this the writer you want on the book? He says, no, I'd rather have so-and-so. Okay. And is this the artist you want on the book? No, I'd rather talk to so-and-so. And I said, well, congratulations. You are in charge of this book. And you can do whatever you want to do with the book. And they'd say, oh, thanks, Tom. And they'd walk out thinking I solved their problem. I just sat there like an idiot and listened, let them talk, and then let them solve their own problems. And most of the time, people will solve their own problems. They just need somebody to bellyache to. And when you're the manager, that's you. You have to sit there and listen to everybody's bellyaching and let them solve their own problems. And then they'll think you're a genius. Not so much in my case.
I tell everybody this, and you're one of them, and Ralph in those early days, because now I manage a whole team. You guys taught me how to manage people, and I appreciate that. So I love that advice. Okay, I got to switch focus because we'll run out of time. I don't get to do it. Now, I ask this question of everybody, and the reason I get this is I lived at Mary's house. I was the intern, and she took care of me and Harry and Hector in the studio back in the days. And those guys taught me, your problem is, who's your influences? And I'd be like, Gene Day. And they're like, and who else? Blah, 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 blah. And they're like, no, outside of comics, you need to look for things outside of comics. And they taught me how your influences shouldn't just be this, right? I ask everybody, who are your influences? Who the people you look up to? And it don't have to be in your industry.
Well, I started with comic strips. So the Phantom as a comic strip was my first superhero. Walt Kelly on Pogo. In comics, I think of Jack Cole and Will Eisner and Joe Kubert and obviously Stan and Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, all of the greats. But I also grew up on Edgar Rice Burroughs. I always feel I got my plotting from Edgar Rice Burroughs, who, set up a scene, and just as the scene was getting in, cut away to a different scene and deal with other characters and get them into, oh, and then we're going to cut back to this guy and go back and forth. And just a great plotter. And Robert E. Howard, I'm going to call him by his Ed McBain, Evan Hunter. I love those Ed McBain mysteries. There's so many that I grew up with, Robert E. Hyland. I am a very voracious reader. Back in the day, I used to read, one or two novels a week, usually one or two newspapers every day. These days, I'm much slower. It takes me sometimes 2 weeks to read a novel. And the newspapers sadly are a thing of the past. And still read a lot of genre novels and mystery novels and biographies and the occasional political thing, but those just make me mad. Just too many things, because I used to read Fantastic Magazine and the magazine of fantasy and science fiction and all these little short stories. And of course, I forgot Ray Bradbury, who had a great effect on so many people my age, and Kurt Vonnegut. Yeah, I have too many influences. I steal from the very best.
That's amazing. I think it's also so generous that you have these influences and they've made such an impact that you still remember all of them, and that you've been able to draw on such a wealth of creativity throughout your career. Tom, this has been completely fantastic, and I feel like I've learned more about writing in the past hour or so than I feel like many years that have gone by previous. But where can other people get a hold of you?
Well, I'm on Facebook. I have too many friends now. Can't have any more friends. I'm on LinkedIn, and that's it for me in social media. And I got tricked into both of those things. I only joined social media because my friends were just browbeating me because I had no social media presence. And they said, you need to have this. And I said, every time I turn on the computer, I should be working. I can't be wasting time on social media. And maybe they were right. Maybe I was wrong. I don't know. I wish I did more social media. Maybe I'd get invited to more comic book conventions. And, otherwise you can find me in Amazon. I still regularly do short stories for the Archie Digest comics, just because they come up with these ridiculous assignments. Hey, we need you to create 2 new characters and do a mystery and add in these 5 Archie characters and do it all in 5 pages. And I goes, how the heck are you? And as soon as I do that, I have to take the assignment. Anytime somebody presents me with something new, I have to take it. Otherwise, I'm quite happy to pass on assignments. I recently did a 4-issue limited series for Marvel called The Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars Battle World. And anybody who can say that 5 times fast, good for you. They presented me with an interesting problem. They wanted me to go back to the original Secret Wars, do a direct sequel, an untold story, and still make it relevant to readers of today. And I thought, wait a minute. And also, it's got to have some haunting elements that 40 years from now, we could do another, sequel on it. So I thought, boy, that's a creative challenge. How do you do that? So naturally, I had to take it. And I think we succeeded, actually. We've set some seeds into something that 40 years from now, somebody else can do the sequel, because I don't think I'm going to be around 40 years from now. But I ended up having a lot of fun. I got to work with my old Spider-Girl artist, Pat Olive, who is just a fabulous artist. My buddy Ron Friends was just too busy to do it. But I got plans for Ron to be working on something else now. And listen, I have to have a big shout out to Ron and Pat, Paul Ryan and Ron Lim and Herb Trimpe and so many other guys that when you think about the comics, you're thinking about the artwork. When you're dealing with great artists like those guys, you can be the biggest bum and it doesn't matter because they carry you. They do such a great job of the artwork. And I'm just so thankful that I managed to con them into working with me for years. And poor Ron, my unindicted co-conspirator, it's going on 40 years now. And we're still trying to come up with nonsense. We just recently released a book called Tom DeFalco, Ron Friends, The Right Project, which you might be able to find in comic book stores if you look deeply. So somewhere along the line, we're going to do a second issue. We always say, we're going to work on this in spare time. Yeah, that's spare time. And of course, I got a shout out to Sal Buscema, who's been the third member of our Three Stooges. Sal, at this stage, thinks he's retired, and we're going to allow him to think that for a little longer until we need him again.
I love that he's retired. He just doesn't, he thinks he is. Tom, it's been a personal pleasure. You really professionally were a major influence. And I told you this on LinkedIn. I am where I am in the world because of you. So it's true, dude.
Right? Maybe we helped a little, but
you helped guide me.
Thank you. I've always wished that I spent more time teaching and guiding, but I had deadlines.
And I have lots of good stories. So anything you'd like to say, speak on? We've even had people talk about their favorite movies. So the floor is yours, my friend.
Well, what I want to do is I want to thank the readers. Thank them for letting me into their homes for so many years and for still letting me in. I'm just a very grateful guy, a lucky guy. I managed to do what I really wanted to do for the last 50 some odd years. And 50 some odd years. And one last thing about that Secret Wars. I'm doing a direct sequel to a story from 40 years ago. And at one point I asked my editor how old he is. He wasn't born when the first Secret Wars came out. So I had to make sure that he could understand the story. And he could. So, well, hopefully you young guys who probably only ever heard of Secret Wars, did you? Oh, you've read it. All right.
I remember where I was when it came out. That was game changer for me.
Well, Jim Shooter and Mike Zick and Bob Layton, all the guys, they did a fabulous job on that.
That's when I fell in love with Zach. That was everyone has that comic. That was my comic that I was like.
Mike, really good guy. That's one of the nice things about comics is so many of the guys in the business really are really good guys. And most of them really are fans. We love this medium. I've often said that if left to my own devices, all I would have done my whole life would have been comics. Luckily, I was not left to my own devices. And for that, my family thanks you very much. My accountant thanks you. I get to live in a nice house. I'm not worried about rent. And I thank you all for that. But I still, anytime anybody has a comic book assignment that has something intriguing, I still have to take it because I'm hooked. I love this stuff. And I also love the opportunity to work with Ron any chance I get, and Pat Olive. It was a real pleasure working with him again because, man, that guy can draw he can draw. He's a real illustrator and can do it all. And you guys are in other fields, so you can hire him too. I'd say you can hire me, but I'm probably too expensive for you. So what can I tell you? All right, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining Rick and myself on another episode of Origins, A Creative Journey, a DesignerCon production. Please like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, download and listen to us every place you get your favorite podcast. Follow us on Instagram at Origins, A Creative Journey, all one word. Drop us an email for thoughts, ideas, or maybe somebody you'd like us to interview at dconpodcast@gmail.com. And make sure you join us in Las Vegas for DesignerCon, North America's premier annual design convention. All the information can be found, including tickets, at designercon.com. Till then, enjoy your own creative journey.